Originali.
È Washington Irving, l'autore che Marco Piovaz ha scelto per le letture a tema natalizio del mese di dicembre a Lingue, Originali, e in particolare nella puntata del venerdì, che è quella dedicata alla letteratura in lingua inglese. Nel 1975, 16 anni dopo la morte di Irving, tutte e quattro le Christmas Stories, insieme alla loro prefazione, furono pubblicate in un volume a parte dal titolo Old Christmas e illustrate da famosi artisti dell'epoca come Randolph Caldecott, Cecil Holding e Peter Burchard. Nel susseguirsi delle storie, Geoffrey Crayon, il narratore, ci racconta del suo viaggio da New York all'Inghilterra, dove è ospite del suo amico Frank Bracebridge, il quale lo invita a trascorrere il Natale presso la casa del padre, Bracebridge Hall, nella campagna inglese. La storia che stiamo leggendo si concentra sulle tradizioni della vigilia, Christmas Eve, appunto. Il secondo estratto dalla voce di Marco Piovaz.
We had now come in full view of the old family mansion, partly thrown in deep shadow and partly lit up by the cold moonshine. It was an irregular building of some magnitude, and seemed to be of the architecture of different periods. One wing was evidently very ancient, with heavy stone-shafted bow windows jutting out and overrun with ivy, from among the foliage of which the small diamond-shaped panes of glass glittered with the moonbeams. The rest of the house was in the French taste of Charles II's time, having been repaired and altered, as my friend told me, by one of his ancestors who returned with that monarch at the Restoration. The grounds about the house were laid out in the old formal manner of artificial flower beds, clipped shrubberies, raised terraces, and heavy stone balustrades, ornamented with urns, a leaden statue or two, and a jet of water. The old gentleman, I was told, was extremely careful to preserve this obsolete finery in all its original state. He admired this fashion in gardening. It had an air of magnificence, was courtly and noble, and befitted good old family style. The boasted imitation of nature in modern gardening had sprung up with modern republican notions, but did not suit a monarchical government. It smacked of the levelling system. I could not help smiling at this introduction of politics into gardening, though I expressed some apprehension that I should find the old gentleman rather intolerant in his creed. Frank assured me, however, that it was almost the only instance in which he had ever heard his father meddle with politics, and he believed that he had got this notion from a member of Parliament who once passed a few weeks with him. The squire was glad of any argument to defend his clipped yew trees and formal terraces, which had been occasionally attacked by modern landscape gardeners. As we approached the house, we heard the sound of music, and now and then a burst of laughter from one end of the building. This, Bracebridge said, must proceed from the servants' hall, where a great deal of revelry was permitted and even encouraged by the squire throughout the 12 days of Christmas, provided everything was done conformably to ancient usage. Here we kept up the old games of Hoodman Blind, Show the Wild Mare, Hot Cockles, Steal the White Loaf, Bob Apple and Snapdragon. The Yule clog and Christmas candle were regularly burnt, and the mistletoe with its white berries hung up, to the imminent peril of all the pretty housemaids. So intent were the servants upon their sports that we had to ring repeatedly before we could make ourselves heard. On our arrival being announced, the squire came out to receive us, accompanied by his 2 other sons, one a young officer in the army, home on a leave of absence, the other an Oxonian, just from the university. The squire was a fine, healthy-looking old gentleman with silver hair curling lightly round an open, florid countenance, in which the physiognomist, with the advantage, like myself, of a previous hint or two, might discover a singular mixture of whim and benevolence. The family meeting was warm and affectionate. As the evening was far advanced, the squire would not permit us to change our travelling dresses, but ushered us at once to the company, which was assembled in a large old-fashioned hall. It was composed of different branches of a numerous family connection, where there were the usual proportion of old uncles and aunts, comfortable married dames, superannuated spinsters, blooming country cousins, half-fledged striplings, and bright-eyed boarding school hoydens. They were variously occupied, some at round games of cards, other conversing around the fireplace. At one end of the hall was a group of the young folks, some nearly grown up, others of a more tender and budding age, fully engrossed by a merry game. And a profusion of wooden horses, penny trumpets, and tattered dolls about the floor showed traces of a troop of little fairy beings, who, having frolicked throughout a happy day, had been carried off to slumber through a peaceful night. While the mutual greetings were going on between young Bracebridge and his relatives, I had time to scan the apartment. I have called it a hall, for so it had certainly been in all times, and the squire had evidently endeavoured to restore it to something of its primitive state. Over the heavy projecting fireplace was suspended a picture of a warrior in armour, standing by a white horse, and on the opposite wall hung a helmet, buckler, and lance. At one end, an enormous pair of antlers were inserted in the wall, the branches serving as hooks on which to suspend hats, whips, and spurs, and in the corners of the apartment were fowling pieces, fishing rods, and other sporting implements. The furniture was of the cumbrous workmanship of former days, though some articles of modern convenience had been added and the oaken floor had been carpeted, so that the whole presented an odd mixture of parlour and hall. The grate had been removed from the wide, overwhelming fireplace to make way for a fire of wood, in the midst of which was an enormous log glowing and blazing and sending forth a vast volume of light and heat. This, I understood, was the Yule clog, which the squire was particular in having brought in and illuminated on a Christmas Eve, according to ancient custom. Herrick mentions it in one of his songs. "Come, bring with noise, my metric merry boys, the Christmas log to the firing, while my good dame, she bids ye all be free, and drink to your heart's desiring." The Yule clog is still burnt in many farmhouses and kitchens in England, particularly in the north, and there are several superstitions connected with it among the peasantry. If a squinting person comes to the house while it is burning, or a person barefooted, it is considered an ill omen. The brand remaining from the Yule clog is carefully put away to light the next year's Christmas fire. It was really delightful to see the old squire seated in his hereditary elbow chair by the hospitable fireside of his ancestors, and looking around him like the son of a system, beaming warmth and gladness to every heart. Even the very dog that lay stretched at his feet, as he lazily shifted his position and yawned, would look fondly up in his master's face, wag his tail against the floor, and stretch himself again to sleep, confident of kindness and protection. There is an emanation from the heart in genuine hospitality which cannot be described, but is immediately felt and puts the stranger at once at his ease. I had not been seated many minutes by the comfortable hearth of the worthy old cavalier before I found myself as much at home as if I had been one of the family.
Le atmosfere natalizie inglesi spiegate agli americani da un inglese. Questo è il tema di Christmas Eve, la lettura del mese di dicembre a lingue originali dedicata alla lingua inglese. A Caffè Italia, come avete compreso, stiamo respirando l'atmosfera del Natale. E lo stiamo facendo anche con Nadia Meroni, la protagonista di Lingue Originali per quanto riguarda la letteratura tedesca il sabato, a cui poi fa seguito Barbara Marchand la domenica sera con la letteratura in lingua francese, sempre alle ore 22. Dario Albertini, che ha il ruolo in questo momento di facilitatore all'ascolto di questi brani, vi ringrazia per l'ascolto e vi dà appuntamento alla prossima puntata.
Lingue Originali.